Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm super excited to introduce you today, Andrew Wetherell from Alto Education. Welcome, Andrew.
Well, thank you for having me, Emily. It's great to be on.
Fantastic. So everyone who's listening or watching doesn't know you. So if you're at a barbecue or a dinner party and someone says, "Oh, g'day, Andrew, what do you do for crust?" What do you tell them?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny, right? Because you don't always just want to go straight to your job and be defined by that. But I guess the usual spiel is around, I really have two pretty fun roles. One is I get to work in a space company, which is training students using space technology. And so
Wow.
that's students who are actually designing satellites and spun out as students who just wanted to do this. And then the other one's designing education, which is also incredibly fun. So getting to try help students figure out where they want to go and really try to find jobs they love. That's the goal.
I love it. And that's why I was drawn to your profile and story, because that's also a passion of mine, is about creating the next generation of purpose-led leaders. And so I've checked out I do a bit of research before I do my podcast. So I've had a look at your website and seen what Alto Education is about. But maybe if you could tell us a little bit about why you started that, and maybe, like, I like to go right back to the start. So let's hear the story of Andrew Wetherell and like when you were a kid and how you ended up working in the space.
Yeah.
And talk us through to how you found your purpose, because it sounds like you're doing something you love, but what's the story?
It's a fascinating question, and I think it starts with the fact that where your purpose lies is actually a lifetime of experiences. So you're very right. You have to go back to that childhood moments, and there's so many that it's incredibly complex to really question what actually influenced you or didn't. So a good example, and really what Alto is all about, is freedom. So we started with the problem that a lot of professionals today are disengaged at work, a very, very high percent, unfortunately. And so when you start to talk to those people, what we found is a lot of them have kind of become complacent in that dissatisfaction without a desire now to move. And so they're just going to stay disengaged for a whole heap of reasons. And a bunch of those are really about internal doubt. They don't know if they're able to make a move to somewhere they'd rather go. They don't think they've got the competency to do so. They can't find opportunities. And so it was more about how to give them freedom from these internal things, really, and then how to use education as the vehicle to do it at a prevention side. So how do you help people before they go to the workforce, make sure they never end up disengaged? Because I think that would be, I think it's just a disaster if people really end up that. And so it's where it started, and probably where it started for me, is I've always been very drawn to that whole concept of freedom. And it's little things like, your parents influence you. Things like I didn't go to kindergarten because I didn't want to, and so my mum gave me that freedom. And you have no idea how that starts to influence. And if you go to the neuroscience, you learn pretty quickly that what you're good at and what you value is generally what you practice most. So we quite often think about our influences in our environment based on what did that teach us, but it's really what did you practice. So parents doing something like that actually then makes you practice something very different. And so it's been an interesting story. It could go into so many things.
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated. I always love hearing about the childhood experiences of people and how they shape them. So tell us about your childhood. Where did you grow up?
I'm a Kiwi, so I grew up in New Zealand, and I've had a very fortunate childhood. I got to travel around the world a lot with my parents, just on holidays. And so I grew up on a beach/farm, two different locations. So again, you kind of just roam about. That's a lot of what I did as a kid. And so most of my life in New Zealand, then moved to Melbourne essentially once I started uni.
And what did you study at uni?
I was business background. So
Yep.
the intent was always to be in banking, funnily enough, and how things
Ooh.
have changed.
Yeah, yep. And so what drove that? So you've always had, like, you've obviously got a bit of an entrepreneurial mind. Are your parents in business, or where does that come from?
Yeah. I think, to be honest, everyone's got an entrepreneurial mind.
Mm.
It's really, at the end of the day, it's more about chasing what you're passionate about, and whether that takes you into entrepreneurship, then that's just the way it has to be. If you're tackling a problem that you can't go and do elsewhere, great. But equally, people might go and find that work in existing companies, also fantastic if they can do that. But my whole family background's finance, law. So my father started his own law firm, so you could say that in itself is entrepreneurial side. And then everyone else is finance, essentially, which is what influenced where I wanted to go. So like most people, your parents, your siblings, and your peers are really dictated at a young age where you want to go. And that's part of the challenge.
It is. So tell us about your work in, I can't remember the name of the company, the space.
The space program. Yeah.
The space program. So what's that about? Like, is it literally about sending people to space, or is what's the that's what I think about the space program. My son wants to be an astronaut. Like, he's like, I want to be an astronaut. And my husband, funnily enough, has said to him, well, you can't. That's not an option for you. We live in Australia. And I'm like, that's not a very good, thing to say to him. He can be whatever he wants to be. We have very different ideas about parenting sometimes. He's Austrian, so he can be very blunt and strict and black and white, whereas I've studied NLP and neuroscience and coaching and psychology. So I'm very, very much about nurturing kids' abilities and strengths and desires and passions. But anyway, what is the space program?
Yeah, so the space program is a not-for-profit that is fundamentally about training students as well. So we use complex projects, take a satellite, and then you'll have students across engineering, science, business, marketing, law, all work together to actually make sure these projects succeed. And so it started as students who just wanted to build a satellite. That was its foundation. And we've kind of gone through all these failures to now figure out how you do that, but importantly, how do you run a company that keeps supporting that as well? So that's half the battle there. So, one project, for example, would have trained over 100 students, and those are all kind of go-getters. So it's really now about how do you find some of the most talented people and provide them this platform to do really awesome work to grow and actually build future pioneers. So the people who we think can leave and hopefully one day change industry for the better. So that's the ambition of what we want to see happen.
Amazing. And then Alto Education, because it's a relatively new enterprise. Is that a social enterprise as well, or is that a business? How does that work? And you're the CEO, so you founded it?
Yes, that's a social enterprise. And it comes back to that overall vision of how do you help people land jobs they love. So that's the world we want to see, is where everyone actually loves what they do. And we think we're focused on this education piece and using that as a vehicle for freedom. That's only one of the root problems to this. So I think you're going to have to collaborate with other companies and other groups who solve the different root problems that prevent people from really loving what they do. But ultimately, it's an education design organization. So our entire focus is on how do you start rethinking the design through delivery of education. And this is an area that's been pretty complacent for a long time because there's been no need to innovate. There's not a particular focus on customers. There's a massive focus on what other universities do, what competitors do. And unfortunately, it's not serving the actual individuals who it should be. And so we want to see that change fundamentally. So, our whole focus there is just design the best possible education we can.
It's amazing. I mean, this is a passion of mine. I have a 7-year-old son who the education system, I would say, is failing dismally, because he has, if you look at the system and the way that they're categorizing him, he's a year behind academically on paper. They say that he's got learning difficulties, and that he's got ADHD and all of these other things. Whereas I see all of these things as his superpowers and his strengths, and all I see is potential, because he thinks differently to other children. Therefore, he learns differently. He processes information differently, and this education system just doesn't cater for children like this. And a lot of entrepreneurs and really successful people have ADHD or dyspraxia or dyslexia because they think differently, and yet the education system fails them. And I've heard stories, once I've started talking about this, I've heard stories of schools asking parents to not bring their kids to school on the days that they have the NAPLAN tests.
Wow.
And I feel like this one modality of intelligence that we measure in the education system is so archaic and so broken. So I'm really...
It's an interesting challenge though, right? Because education, you've got... So schooling, I think, is a lot harder than where we are. I think the university level is very easy because you have students who, first of all, their brains further develop. So an important part of development, which happens generally in early 20s, is in the prefrontal cortex. It actually allows for better reflective. So I can actually do something and then reflect on it and really question it. Kids can't do that so well. And so part of your challenge is, well, how do we help kids experiment, find what they enjoy, where their strengths are, build all the right foundations that's going to set them up for life? And then it's a cost perspective. How do I do this in a standardized way that actually I can cater to all the students? And so, yeah, this is a really hard problem. But I completely agree. There's the current way it's run isn't tailored to actually how we learn at all. So I'm not sure why it's gone to this way, other than probably standardization or scale, I should say, is, we learn by doing. We learn by observing and practicing and doing, and that's how we're evolved as well. Language is a relatively new thing in our evolution, and it's probably not even relevant biologically. And so it's kind of arrogant to think it's the best way to learn is writing something down, reading it, and then, okay, now you understand it. Well, that's not how anything else learns. Why do we think we would learn the best that way? So the strengths piece is also very interesting, because if you ask someone, even a professional, what's your strength? And it's generally a skill is what they pull out. Yeah. And strengths are generally very unique things that come across a whole heap of skills that are unique to that person when they come together. And that's an interesting one. If you can actually help kids figure out where their strength is and then how to leverage that, that's a very powerful tool.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Yeah. But we don't focus on that in the education system. We grade people and then focus on them passing or failing a certain test that is typically around memorizing large chunks of information. Yeah. And some people are really good at that. It doesn't mean that they're intelligent, I would say. They're just really good at memorizing stuff. And then other kids are not. So I'm not good at memorizing chunks of information, but I'm really good at interpreting information and forming conclusions and analyzing stuff. So I did well in certain subjects because if there was any ambiguity that I could play with, in my job now, I've got a few businesses, my team call me the fluffer because I can fluff something up. And they call me the queen of bullshit because I can bullshit my way through anything, but that's not really measured at school. And I was an A grade student. Do you know what I mean? So it's like strengths are so important and so unique. And so how's Alto Education really planning on changing the education system? Is it at the primary and high school level, or is it like what's your strategy?
Yeah. Well, I might just come back quickly to that, because part of the problem that we're seeing, and this is true for schools and university, is that we're starting to define success by how many students pass the tests. And the issue is, are those tests a real reflection of how good this person's going to be in the real world? And the answer is no. Yeah. So it's the part of that challenge comes to how do you start doing real evaluation? And if you're thinking about a company, equally trying to only evaluate outcomes is a pretty shitty way to do evaluation. You have to think about the inputs that are going to drive those outcomes. And no one on the planet today could sit you down and go, here's the inputs that actually matter and drive the quality of learning and therefore the actual outcomes for this individual. So that is a really significant problem. That's one where we think artificial intelligence or really just machine learning is going to be able to help. But no one on the planet yet has cracked that question of how do we start doing real evaluation in a cost-effective way that is actually going to enable us to tailor to students and help them develop where it's most valuable. So for us, that's an interesting question. We're trying to figure that one out. But we probably won't play into schools today because we believe that we can do enough action right now at the university level to actually grow people. Well, we'll do university, but young adults to grow people and still prevent the overall problem we're trying to tackle. If we find we can't, then we will go back into schools and start thinking about how do you really rejig that system. The challenge is that's a lot more bureaucratic. There's just a lot more challenges you've got to run through to do it in schools. And I think there is this really important part of schooling where they have to experiment. They have to try out different subjects. You need fundamental mathematics, these kind of things, unlock a lot of other things like, can I understand technology well? And understanding tech generally means you can then figure out, be more creative with your solutions, all of these kind of things. But look, I would say we're not in the business. Don't think about it as trying to disrupt a system. I couldn't really care about competitors in that sense. It's more about let's just serve the people what they actually need and what they want, and let's focus on that fully. So that's really our thinking. I just want to focus on the students.
Yeah, and that's amazing because I think it's really important that we help young people tap into what their strengths are, what their purpose is, and what they want to be doing at a very young age, rather than them ending up having a quarter life crisis is what I call it. And I think a lot of millennials have a quarter life crisis. So I do a lot of work with people who have a quarter life crisis and then they're like, holy shit, I'm 25. I hate my job. I don't have any interest in finance, and I've just spent, a lot of money on a degree, and now I'm working in this job that I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. What the frig am I going to do?
It's better than a midlife crisis though, and being 40 and figuring that out, right? So
there's still people who have them, but I think a lot of young people. It feels like, I don't know if you agree with this. It feels like young people work this out a lot earlier than say other generations.
Well,
I
think there's a lot of trends that we have to recognize. One is the fact that the base level of welfare in most Western countries now is getting to the point that you're going to live pretty comfortably no matter really where you're working. So that's a really important thing to recognize, is how much wealth has moved and therefore our ability to live comfortably. Because if you take it back, 100 years ago, you really did need to work just to be able to sustain. And now it's people have a lot more opportunity to actually go and do things they enjoy. So that's a kind of new phenomenon which is only going to continue. And if you then forecast really 40, 50 years ahead, when we've got mass automation and resource scarcity starts to be tackled with things like space mining, well, now you're going to have a massive shift in the abundance of resources, the abundance of wealth. What are people going to do if they're only growing in the mindset of work for money, work for living? Because the reality is that's no longer what you're going to do. You're going to choose what you enjoy. So we have to be setting up that foundation and learning how to do that today if we want to be ready for the future. But the other thing that the newer generations coming through have is a lot more access to information. So I can go watch videos and listen to very intelligent people speak about their experiences from their lifetime and learn a lot. And that hasn't been accessible to, say my parents' generation. They couldn't do that. So I think we get a lot of lessons that we couldn't otherwise get today. And that's what helps us figure out a lot of these things. And then there's obviously just the nature of, as society and cultures, we shift what we prioritize, and we shift what the base level of intelligence and knowledge is. And we're fortunate to be in the position we are, but I probably guarantee our kids will be even smarter than us, and they'll be figuring out this stuff even younger than us. And hopefully it cycles that way.
Yeah, you would think so. And I think that parents these days, like millennial parents, I've done a lot of research into millennials, parent differently to other generations, and it's all about choice and agency and letting their kids be who they want to be, rather than like I'm a Gen X, so my dad pushed me into doing a commerce degree and studying commerce, even though I wanted to study anthropology or archaeology. I'm fascinated in human behavior and ancient civilizations and all this stuff. And I think that with me, and I've got a 7-year-old son, I'm going to let him do whatever he wants to do and what makes him happy. I'm not going to, like, we've already created a contract that he's just about to launch a social enterprise. I'm trying to channel his strengths and his interests. And we've made a contract that if he can raise $1 million or turn over $1 million in his social enterprise, then he can quit school. And I've said, if you're 10 when that happens, you can quit school when you're 10, like legitimately. And I believe that if that's what he wants to do, and he can quit school and he can be a business person if that's what he wants to do. So I think that the way that we think about education and higher education and universities even shifting, because based on what you said, and this is what I'm seeing, a lot of university degrees are becoming obsolete. Like if you wanted to study marketing, say you did a marketing degree 3 years ago, by the time you actually get a job in marketing, everything has shifted and evolved so much since then. Like, is your degree relevant? Like, what's your thoughts around higher education and university degrees? Do you think in 20 years' time people are going to be paying 120 grand to study marketing?
It's a good question. My answer would be that yes, they're going to be going to uni in 20 years' time. It might be cheaper than that because we'll standardize things and we'll figure out how to get more efficient. And I don't think the costs are actually that high if you look at the university side today. That's more about how do you subsidize research problem. But if I sit in an employer's shoes, I don't think I'm hiring someone out of uni because of necessarily what they've learned, but for two reasons. One, it's time to mature, and there is an important time where students mature. And the other is that actual piece of paper you get is still extremely valuable, and there's a standard and policy generally in most companies that, we're going to look for people with that. So as much as I think from a straight learning perspective and practice perspective, there's better things you can do, the reality of today is that that piece of paper is still as valuable. And I don't think that's actually going to change. I know there's a lot of, I always hear it when we said how MOOCs are going to disrupt all higher education, and then I hear people talking about how shit's going to disrupt it again. You kind of go, well, the thing is, it's more about, as a society and as parents on the whole, if we think it matters, then it matters. That's all that really drives it. It's a speculation thing. And so I don't see that changing quickly. If it does change, will be in enough time that the unis themselves will adapt and they will evolve. While they have been slow, that's because they haven't had a need to be quick. So, they've been in this very safe spot. As soon as someone actually starts challenging them, I guarantee they'll move quickly because they've got a lot of smart people in there. And so what I hope is that they do adapt, and they adapt to be very focused on students, and instead they start looking at how do we maximize the value back to students, and that would be an amazing thing.
I agree. I think that one thing university does obviously teach you how to do is how to think. Like, it teaches you how to analyze and critically assess things, and like that's what I walked out of university with. I did a commerce degree and I studied marketing and human resource management. I don't think I learnt anything that I use in my trade today, because like everything, it evolves so much and so quickly. I mean, this was 20 years ago. I'm showing my age. But it definitely taught me how to think, and it teaches you discipline and being able to meet deadlines. And I do agree that there is definitely some validity and value in teaching young people these things. But I think for some people, university is just not their thing. School is not just not their thing. They, as you said before, people learn through doing and action. And a lot of entrepreneurs dropped out of school at a young age, or were a university dropout. I interview lots of millennial entrepreneurs, and there's a very similar story and trajectory that I hear in their story, and that is that the education system failed them, and that they had teachers telling them they're never going to amount to anything, that they're basically useless, and all these kinds of things. So I think that we definitely need to have some change and disruption. But like, I think that there's certain university degrees that are like, if you want to be a doctor, yes, you have to go to uni. If you want to be an engineer and build
law,
bridges,
you have to actually meet some kind of standard. So that kind of stuff is important. I'd say this. So when we talk about how fast things change, I actually don't think that's true. So the way we distribute things, these kind of things do change quickly, but the underlying principles, almost everything hasn't changed. I mean, strategy hasn't changed for thousands of years. It's still the exact same principles underlying it. How you do a good culture hasn't changed. How you do operations hasn't changed. Marketing really hasn't changed. The underlying principles, our methods and the frameworks we use do. But I think anyone who's really good at what they do generally recognizes frameworks go so far anyway. And then it's just about rationality and questioning what's a better way of doing this to achieve the overall outcome. So if unis can get to that principled approach, then I think it'll be brilliant. And they quite possibly have this in content. The issue is, do the audience actually recognize that? And you need to start thinking about how to do things in a more engaging way, so actually people do concentrate. Because the reality is, most people sit in an hour lecture, get talked at, what could be a 3-hour lecture. I mean, I'm not going to listen to a 3-hour lecture, and I'm generally a pretty keen person to be there. So I think that's just a little bit ignorant of the fact that, and not even recognizing that's how they wouldn't learn that way. So a bit of self-awareness. The other challenge is and you kind of put it in there, is you have teachers who tell kids they're not going to amount to much. And this is one of the hardest problems with education is the teacher matters so much right now. And you can't, I mean, in Silicon Valley, they always talk about how to remove these people, make they're a variable you can remove. I'm not so sure that's true at the moment. And I'm not sure you want to, because it's not just delivering content. It should be trying to inspire people. It should be trying to actually empower them. And we can't do that in a digital way. So how do you actually, first of all, get the right people in there is a really hard question, especially if you don't have competitive salary. And then how do you enable them to deliver better? That's really what a lot of the focus has to shift to. Because I think there's a lot of caught up in AI.
Oh, hang on. You're glitching. Are you there? Oh, there you are. You're back.
Yeah. Okay.
I think your internet's just gone a bit weird.
Right.
No, it's still glitching. Maybe if you want to get out and then come back in, sometimes that works. Sorry, everyone. We just got a bit of a technical difficulty. We'll just wait for Andrew to get out and then come back in. Technology's great while it's working, shit while it's not. He's taking his time. Oh, there he is. We'll bring him back in. There you are. That's
Right.
better.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just saying technology's great while it works and
It's
not great when it doesn't.
Beauty of remote work, right?
That's it. Anyway, it's not the first time it's happened, so don't worry. So we might just now change direction a little bit. The way I found you was on LinkedIn, and you were actually promoting a new program that you've launched through Alto. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what that is and how people can get involved? Because I'm sure there's people listening who are either students who might want to apply for your program or organisations, or let's talk about that.
Sure. So this is it's a new education program we're running through July, and it's really, the overall concept is how can you combine impact with learning? So it's going to be a program that sees students actually work as teams to try and scope their own projects to tackle climate change. And we ran a similar concept earlier this year, which was in the energy sector. But we think you have a lot more power in the learning when the students actually love what they do. Yeah. And one of the great ways to do that is actually by giving them one, autonomy to do real projects, and they choose those projects. And then the second is when you actually allow them to have impact. So this is it's a very experimental way of doing project-based learning that then is kind of all underpinned by the self-organizing system to try and make it scalable. So we don't know how that's going to work yet. It very much is an experiment in that sense.
Yeah.
But one of the things we are setting up and we want to see happen is actually allow professionals to be able to pretty much autonomously engage with students. So there'll be teams who scope their own projects, and we would have pictures online of what their actual project is, what they're trying to deliver, what it's working towards, and they're following a framework to do essentially visionary product strategy. So how do you work backwards from one super big, clear goal to turn it into something you can execute today and stack towards that end goal? And then we want professionals to actually be able to support those teams. So be able to give them advice. They'll do weekly showcases that we'll have videos on, so they can give live feedback or connect the students with teams elsewhere in the professional community who might be able to assist. So yeah, it's really it's just a whole new way of trying to educate, I suppose. It's been a lot of fun, I'll say that.
It's amazing. I love it, because I think that what university sometimes lacks in is that practical application. And they try and do it and they try and emulate it, but that sounds amazing. So if people are listening, who are you looking for at the moment that could support you? Is it businesses or is it students? Who would you like to click on the links below that we're going to share and learn more?
So I think if there's any students, please apply. I think it's going to be a really great program, actually. And we hit a lot on self-awareness, on emotional intelligence, building resilience, all these kind of things. And it's very much being co-designed with employers to make sure not only to deliver a great experience, but it's actually giving them the skills they need for the future. For any professionals, we're pretty indifferent to what background. I actually think there's a lot of wisdom across every sector that can come together and support. And the most useful thing is always in people's failures they've had in their own experience in life, and then the lessons they've learned. And I think they're generally pretty fundamental to success no matter what you're working on, is learning these things. So yeah, anyone who I'd say is passionate about climate change or passionate about future generations and wants to be able to support that.
Amazing. It sounds so interesting and fascinating. It's a great space to be in, and something that's totally needed. So well done. It's been amazing talking to you. The last question I'm going to ask you, because I do a lot of work into mindset and the millennial mindset, and I'm writing a book. as a millennial, I'm assuming you're a millennial. You look like you're between the ages of 23 and 37.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good.
Yep.
I was going to say, what's the age bracket?
Yep. So 23 to 37. Actually, no, it's actually shifted. It's 24 to 38 now because every year it changes.
All right.
So what's your morning routine or your daily routine? How do you keep focused? Because when I interview millennials, there seems to be some common threads.
Oh, geez. There's a lot. I guess the first most important thing is good amount of sleep. So I don't use a clock or anything, alarm clock, just natural, and done that for years.
Yep.
And that's fantastic. But then, in terms of keeping focus, it's really a whole heap of stuff. I don't do time management. I just focus on priority commitments and make sure I'm working through whatever the highest priority things are. And I find we're not very good at estimating time. So I rather estimate effort on things.
Yep.
Then there's important things like recognizing your state of emotions. How are you feeling? What is the best way to be feeling for the task you're about to do? So have a very clear to-do list of every day. And then actually manipulating that to optimize for the kind of work I'm doing. And generally do that using music is a very easy way to do it. Then there's things like a system of how you do every task, on breaking down why this actually matters. Make sure you're doing something that adds value. And then what's the one goal? How do you know you've succeeded on this thing? So you've got something to come back to and really assess, have I succeeded in doing that? And then there's just good general task management. So only ever focus on one task at a time. Again, good biological reasons for that. You can't multitask. I know everyone likes to think they can. But anything you're doing that's cognitively complex is in the prefrontal cortex, which is serial processing. You can't multitask. And then there is, just good breakdown of your week, why you need to do these tasks, why it's the right thing to commit to, and then a daily commitment to how do I improve each day. So always thinking, how do I get more efficient, more effective? But good diet, health, all that stuff's fundamental as well. You have to have that before you can focus and be kind of on point. And then enjoy it. If you're not doing what you enjoy and you're not energized by your work, well, that's the easiest way to be focused. It's not really a challenge anymore if it's the thing you want to be doing.
Amazing. So, I love every single millennial I ask I learn something new and get a little tidbit, but I think there's some great tips there. I'm very interested in this concept of just waking up and sleeping when you want, because I get up at 5 o'clock every morning, but I naturally wake up at that time now because I've conditioned myself, and I try and go to bed at the same time every night, because I find that routine creates discipline, and it actually also makes you feel safe to have that routine. Your body and your mind, we're creatures of habit and we like routine. It makes us feel like, that's why I always liken it to, that's why babies respond and children respond well to routine. It makes them feel safe, and it makes certainty of what's going to happen. So very interesting. You're super intelligent, and I've learnt so much today. I've loved hearing your story and about Alto Education. It's something that is a passion of mine. So I'm really excited and impressed that we've got some millennials in there trying to change the way that we're doing it and the way that we're thinking about it. But if people want to learn more about you and your work, where can they find you?
Easiest way is reach out to me on LinkedIn, to be honest. That's probably where I'll be responsive. Otherwise, you can go to altoeducation.com as well, and that's just got any information about us as a company.
Amazing. Thank you so much for giving up your time and your wisdom. For someone of your age, you look very young. You have a lot of wisdom, so it's very impressive. Keep doing what you're doing, and very inspiring conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and all the best with the future podcasting.
No problem. Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone for listening.
All right. Thank you.